The moment I saw the steel barricades welded across my ranch gate, I slammed my brakes so hard my truck screeched to a halt, kicking up a storm of red dust. I was frozen. The entire entrance to my ranch, my own private property, had been blocked off. Huge metal poles dug deep into the ground reinforced with concrete. A bold sign on the front read, "Access denied, HOA regulation zone. No entry without HOA clearance." I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. That gate had been the only access road into my land. 600 acres of inherited family property in Arizona that had never, not once, been subject to any HOA. I stepped out of my truck in disbelief, stormed up to the barricade and felt it with both hands. Solid, freshly installed. I wasn't imagining this. The worst part? Just 2 weeks earlier, I'd gotten a smug letter from the Twin Creeks HOA. It said they were reviewing territorial rights and coordinating shared space control. I had laughed it off, knowing my ranch was legally not part of their jurisdiction. Now, they had the nerve to physically block me from my own land. That's when something inside me snapped. I knew right there I wasn't just going to remove the barricade, no, I was going to buy the very ground they were standing on. And when I was done, they wouldn't just be sorry. They'd be paying triple just to breathe the air around me. But before I could begin my plan, I needed to figure out how far they'd gone, and why. That's when I saw the HOA president's name at the bottom of that ugly sign, Carl Hopkins. And just like that, it all began. Now let me take you back, because to understand why this happened, you need to meet the characters that brought this whole mess to life. My name's Randy Walker. I'm 43, a retired U.S. Army engineer, and the proud owner of Rocking W Ranch, passed down through 5 generations. After 20 years of service, I moved back to Arizona to live a quiet life with my black lab, Ranger. I built a simple cabin, raised cattle, and kept to myself. Carl Hopkins, on the other hand, was the newly elected HOA president of Twin Creeks community. He was in his late 50s, with a stiff back, stiff attitude, and a love for clipboards. He drove a white BMW, wore polo shirts with his name embroidered on the chest, and treated his HOA badge like it was a sheriff's star. He moved into the house closest to the private dirt road that ran past the community to my ranch, and ever since, he's acted like the road belonged to him. The other board members weren't much better. There was Linda Cartwright, a retired school principal with binoculars always hanging from her neck, who used them not for birds but for watching what color my truck was when I drove by. Then there was Jim Blake, the treasurer, who once knocked on my door demanding to see my ranch tax filings, claiming they needed it for the HOA archive. Now here's the twist. I wasn't even in the HOA. Not by law, not by choice, not by paperwork. The ranch had been exempted from any community expansion because of a land preservation clause that went back to 1978. But that didn't stop Carl and his clipboard crew from acting like their authority stretched beyond their borders. At first, it was harmless. Little things like flyers about voluntary beautification or mail about ranch compliance suggestions. But then came the surveyor. About a month before the barricade incident, I'd spotted a man in a yellow vest measuring trees along the side of my road. When I confronted him, he told me he was from the HOA, hired to check boundary alignments for road maintenance. I told him the road was private and unincorporated. He left without arguing. But that was the first warning sign. The second came when I returned from a weekend hunting trip and found one of my mailboxes smashed, a flyer sticking out of the ground beside it that read, "This property needs order. You've been warned." Still, I didn't report it. I thought, let it go. They'll get bored. I was wrong. The third sign came 3 days before they welded my gate shut. Ranger, my black lab, went missing. I searched everywhere for him. I drove up and down the perimeter, called neighbors, even posted online. That evening, I heard scratching at the back of my cabin. There he was, dirty, bleeding from a small cut on his side, with a plastic HOA tag zip-tied around his collar. I ripped it off and saw the note inside. Maybe next time he'll stay inside. That was the last straw. So when I found the barricade on that Tuesday morning, my blood boiled, not just from the obstruction, but from every small cut they had made leading up to it. And now, they had crossed the line. I took photos, called the sheriff, and filed a trespassing complaint. But that's when I hit another wall. Turns out the road that led to my gate had recently been rezoned, without my knowledge. The local records office said a transfer of usage rights had been approved because no opposition was filed. And that's when I realized they played dirty and they played fast. I knew I needed a lawyer, a good one. So I called in the one man I trusted with firepower and paperwork, my cousin Patrick Walker. Patrick wasn't just a lawyer, he was a land acquisition shark, the kind of guy who didn't just win cases, he bought out the land beneath your feet while you were still in court. We met the next morning over eggs and coffee at my cabin. After showing him everything, the pictures, the tag, the zoning documents, he put his fork down and said, "Randy, I hope you're ready, because we're not just taking them to court. We're going to own them." Patrick's plan was bold. Buy out every square foot of landscape around Twin Creeks, right up to the HOA borders. And with my savings, my military pension, and a small inheritance from my late uncle, we could do it. The best part? That same land was used by the HOA for their Community Landscape Fund, which meant that once we owned it, they'd have to pay us to maintain access to it. We started quietly. Patrick set up a shell company, Blue Cactus Holdings, and began reaching out to the private sellers around the Twin Creeks HOA zone. Most of them were older families who wanted to downsize or were behind on land taxes. Within 2 weeks, we had contracts lined up for 57% of the land surrounding the community, including the scenic trail, the dog park, and the wetlands view Carl had bragged about in HOA newsletters. But we weren't done. We were just getting started. Because the next land parcel on our list was the one right beside the HOA's main entrance, the very piece of property Carl had tried to buy 3 times over the past 2 years. It belonged to an old rancher named Edgar. And that's where things took a surprising turn. Edgar didn't want money. He wanted revenge. Turns out Carl had once filed a noise complaint against Edgar's grandkids, nearly got his dog taken away, and even tried to fine him for having rusty wind chimes. So when Patrick told him what we were planning, Edgar didn't just sell us the land, he sold it to us at half the market rate. And that gave us just enough room to build a private access road through HOA territory, legally, under a clause that had never been used before. We were ready. We were about to drop the hammer. But then, just as we were finalizing the last deed, I got a call from my ranch manager. "Randy, something's happened." I asked what. He paused. "You'd better come see for yourself. The HOA just poured concrete into your waterline trench." I froze. "What do you mean poured, like dumped concrete into the trench?" "No, man," he said. "They filled the whole thing, like it's a sidewalk now. Pipes crushed, water flow blocked." I dropped my phone, grabbed my keys, and rushed back to the ranch. And when I got there, the trench that had been dug to repair my main ranch waterline was now a smooth, gray concrete slab, complete with a spray-painted HOA logo in the middle. That's when I realized this wasn't just a land dispute anymore. This was war. Where are you watching from? Drop your state or city in the comments. Let's see how far this ranch showdown travels. I stood there staring at the solid gray block of concrete that had replaced my ranch's waterline trench. My boots sank slightly into the soft dirt around the newly dried slab, and all I could think was, they did this in the middle of the night. No permission, no warning, and worst of all, no concern that they had just shut off the water supply to my entire ranch. Livestock, crops, everything. Ranger barked behind me as if to echo my rage. Carl Hopkins had finally gone too far. This was no longer about boundaries or dues or community order. This was sabotage. I called the county inspector. He confirmed the permits showed no legal construction authorized for that patch of land. But he also said, if it was done under the name of HOA emergency infrastructure, it might take weeks to sort out. Weeks? I didn't have weeks. My cattle needed water, my crops needed irrigation, and I needed to make sure Carl knew who he was messing with. So I did the unthinkable. That night, I rented a backhoe. Me, Randy Walker, Army vet, ranch owner, amateur heavy equipment operator. And at 4:15 a.m., while the moon still hung over the Arizona desert, I took that backhoe right up to that concrete trench and tore it open like it was wrapping paper on Christmas morning. Chunks flew, dust filled the air, pipes cracked, but I didn't care. My water line was beneath that concrete, and I was going to rescue it. I worked for 2 hours straight, then reconnected the flow just as the sun peeked over the horizon. Victory? Not exactly. Because by noon, Carl and his clipboard gang were standing at the edge of my property, arms folded, lips twisted. I hope you know, Carl said. This is destruction of community property. I didn't even look up from fixing the valve. This ain't your community, Carl. It's mine. Always has been. Linda, holding her binoculars like a baby, chimed in. You'll be hearing from our legal committee. I am the legal committee now, I said. You just don't know it yet. Because what Carl didn't realize was that Patrick and I had already closed on 78% of the landscape around the HOA borders. The final few parcels were under review, which meant that every little amenity the HOA bragged about, the dog trail, the picnic area, the reflection pond, was now technically under my control. We filed the paperwork the next day, and that's when the real fun began. Once the land was in our name, Patrick got busy reclassifying those areas as independently managed private property with restricted usage. In simpler terms, it was still green and grassy and looked like public space, but now anyone who wanted access had to pay us, including the HOA. That's when Patrick sent them a letter, official, notarized, and ice cold. Dear Twin Creeks HOA, due to recent territorial adjustments, Blue Cactus Holdings now owns and manages key landscapes previously assumed to be under HOA management. In order to continue community access, an updated landscape lease agreement has been proposed. HOA dues will now include a 3x multiplier to cover access, insurance, and usage maintenance. Failure to comply will result in immediate loss of privileges and physical closure of said properties. Signed, sealed, delivered. Carl had a full meltdown in front of the HOA clubhouse. I know because Edgar recorded the whole thing and sent it to me. Carl shouted at Jim. Jim shouted at Linda. Linda threw her clipboard at a passing golf cart. They held an emergency town hall meeting. Homeowners were furious. Some even walked out when they realized their monthly dues were about to skyrocket from $300 to $900. But did I stop there? Of course not. Remember that parcel right at the community entrance? The one Edgar sold us? We turned it into a massive billboard. Bright red letters. Private land. Trespassers will be fined property of Blue Cactus Holdings sponsored by Rocking W Ranch, East, 1892. It was the talk of the entire neighborhood. Some folks from the community, especially those who had never really agreed with Carl's heavy-handed rules, started calling me, asking if I had room on my ranch for them to lease small plots or park trailers. I told them, maybe, if you're kind, and if you're not Carl. Meanwhile, Carl wasn't taking it well. He tried to appeal to the county, filed multiple complaints, but Patrick had done everything by the book. We had the deeds, the surveys, and the maps. Carl even tried to accuse me of intimidation. So what did I do? I invited a local news crew to do a piece on Rancher Battles HOA tyranny. They loved it, called me the cowboy landlord. I wore my Stetson, showed them Ranger, and even gave them a tour of the billboard. The segment aired during prime time. The next morning, I found flowers at my gate and a handwritten note. Dear Mr. Walker, not everyone in Twin Creeks agrees with Carl. Thank you for standing up to him. Some of us are on your side. Your silent neighbors. That warmed my heart more than I expected, But not everything was calm. Because that afternoon, as I returned from town, I saw something that stopped me cold. The HOA clubhouse was swarming with activity. Trucks, construction workers, cement mixers, pallets of bricks. I pulled over and watched from a distance, and then I saw it. A wall. They were building a wall. Tall. Stone. Right along the edge of the main trail that used to run into my newly acquired landscape. As if they thought they could box me out again. But here's what they didn't know. I had already filed an easement request on the far side of the wall, and once that paperwork processed, they'd be sealed in like a castle with no way out but through my land. Still, watching that wall go up triggered something in me. A fire. A need to show them I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was planning. So I turned to Patrick and said, "We're going to give them 1 week." "1 week for what?" he asked. "1 week," I said, "to remove that wall. Or I make them pay for airspace access, too." He raised a brow. "Randy, are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting a drone hub, right above their community, with a giant spotlight, streaming live." We both laughed hard, but then my phone rang again. It was the sheriff. And his voice was tense. "Randy, someone set fire to one of your outer barns. Looks like arson." My heart dropped. I jumped in the truck, Ranger leaping beside me. The ranch was about to face more than politics now. It had just turned dangerous. By the time I got to the ranch's western barn, the fire was mostly out, but the damage was real. Black smoke curled into the pale morning sky, and the structure looked like a collapsed skeleton. Charred beams, twisted metal, ash where stacks of feed used to be. My heart sank as I stepped out of the truck. Ranger stayed close by my side, sniffing the air and whining low. 2 deputies stood near the smoking rubble, arms crossed. One of them, Deputy Kelly, waved me over. "We got here as fast as we could, Randy," she said. "Neighbor called it in just after 3 a.m., saw the glow from the hill, said it looked like the whole sky was on fire." I stared at the damage, then asked the only question that mattered. "Was it arson?" She nodded. "We found traces of accelerant along the north wall. It was deliberate." My fists clenched. "You know who?" She paused. "We don't have hard proof, but we did find this in the grass nearby." She handed me a piece of scorched plastic, a fragment of a clipboard, the same kind Carl always carried. It wasn't confirmation, but it was close enough. They'd tried to block my gate, poured concrete in my trench, and now they were burning down barns. What next? My house? Patrick arrived just minutes later, his Jeep kicking up gravel as it skidded to a stop. His eyes went wide at the sight. "Jesus, Randy, they're not backing down." I didn't answer right away. I was watching a trail of black soot drift up into the clouds. Something inside me felt colder than ever before. Not angry, not even sad. Just clear. "They want a war?" I finally said. "Fine, let's give them one. But not with fire, with pressure." Patrick blinked. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time we enforce the triple dues, publicly. We'll send certified letters to every homeowner. We'll list the new amounts. And we'll tell them, we're shutting down access if they don't comply." He grinned. "You really want to make them pick between Carl and water?" "Exactly." And that's what we did. The next day, over 100 certified letters went out. Patrick hand-delivered the first few himself while I oversaw the installation of new fencing, tall, reinforced, and clean-cut, along every inch of the land we now owned around Twin Creeks. The HOA wasn't just surrounded now. They were boxed in. And then came the chaos. Carl called an emergency meeting. Residents were furious. News had already gotten around that I owned most of the land surrounding their homes, and now they were being told to pay 3 times more in HOA dues or lose access to parks, trails, even the main entrance. One by one, homeowners began questioning everything. "I never agreed to this. Why are we in an HOA if we don't even own the space around us? I thought the trails were protected public property." Carl tried to hold the room, but he couldn't. By the end of the meeting, 4 board members had resigned. Jim Blake, the treasurer, stood up and said, "I warned you, Carl. You poked the wrong bear. Now we're broke and boxed in." Linda left with tears in her eyes, saying, "This was supposed to be a retirement dream, not a prison." And me? I was watching all of it. From a drone camera. We had mounted it on a 20-foot pole just across the fence line. It streamed the HOA clubhouse door 24/7 on a website titled www.hocaged.com. It wasn't petty, it was proof. Proof that bullies eventually lose when someone finally pushes back. Still, not everyone in the community was my enemy. One evening, a young couple, Jason and Megan, came up to the new ranch fence and waved me over. They looked nervous but kind. "Mr. Walker," Jason said, "we just wanted to say, we're sorry." I tilted my head. For what? We've lived here 3 years, paid our dues, tried to stay out of it. But now, with the water lines and the fees and all the trails gone, we realized Carl doesn't care about us. He only cared about controlling everything. Megan nodded. "We heard you might lease land for gardens and sheds. We'd like to be part of that if you'll have us." I smiled. This was what made it worth it. "Tell you what," I said. "You two help me rebuild that barn they burned down, and I'll give you the first plot for free." They beamed. It wasn't just about beating Carl anymore. It was about restoring something better. But just when I thought things were turning around, that's when I saw it. A shiny black SUV creeping down the private road toward my main cabin. It wasn't from the sheriff, not county, not state. The plates were federal. The man who stepped out wore a suit and sunglasses. He introduced himself with a badge. "Mr. Walker, I'm with the Bureau of Land Management. We've received multiple complaints regarding land use, air surveillance, and resource restriction. I'm here to review your holdings." I blinked. "Wait, you're saying someone reported me to the feds?" He nodded. "Yes, sir. Multiple anonymous complaints. From inside the HOA." And that's when I realized Carl wasn't done fighting. He had taken it upstairs. The federal agent's sunglasses reflected the sunlight as he studied my ranch from the driveway. He was calm, professional, and polite, which somehow made it all feel worse. "I'm not here to cause trouble, Mr. Walker," he said. "But when enough formal complaints hit our system, especially about restricted land access and water management, we're required to investigate. These complaints allege environmental disruption and unlawful restriction of public trails." I stared at him, stunned. "Environmental disruption? The only people disrupting this land are the same ones who poured concrete in my water line and burned down my barn." "I understand your frustration," he said. "But until we get clarity, we're putting a temporary hold on your development. That includes your fencing, drone equipment, and any new infrastructure within 500 feet of the HOA perimeter." I laughed. I had to. "Let me get this straight. They illegally weld a gate shut, pour concrete on my trench, sabotage my barn, and I'm the one getting flagged?" He shrugged. "We're just following procedure. If you feel it's unjust, you're free to submit counter evidence. But in the meantime," I cut in, "I can't touch the land I legally bought?" "For now," he said. "Yes." He handed me a letter. Official seal. BLM watermark. My blood boiled. As the agent walked back to his SUV, I stood there, the dust swirling around my boots, knowing one thing for sure. Carl was fighting dirty, and he'd just used every connection he could find to drag me into bureaucratic hell. That night, I sat with Patrick and our paralegal Tara, going over every inch of paperwork. Patrick slammed his hand on the table. They found a loophole. The original zoning filings from the 1980s mention an old wildlife corridor that runs along the south edge of your land. It's been inactive for 40 years, but technically, it's still protected. Tara added, "Which means they're using that clause to file emergency injunctions. Even if the complaints are false, they'll stall us, long enough to drain your resources." So this was their new game. Stall me out, tie me up in red tape, and hope I'd back down. But I don't back down. Instead, I switch tactics. If they wanted to fight with forms and filings, then I'd flood them with truth. Within 72 hours, we had filed a counter-complaint with video proof of the HOA trespassing and sabotaging private property, submitted drone footage showing Carl himself overseeing the illegal wall construction, collected testimony from Jason, Megan, and Edgar about HOA harassment, noise complaints, and discriminatory targeting, sent cease and desist letters to every board member still in office. But it wasn't enough. The next week I got hit with another notice, this time from the county planning board. Apparently, Carl had submitted a community concern petition signed by 30 homeowners. The claim? That my drone poles were psychologically distressing and violated community skyline harmony. Skyline harmony. That's not a joke, that's verbatim. I could hardly breathe from laughing. Patrick, however, wasn't laughing. They're trying to bury us, Randy. Not just legally, socially. They want to make you the villain. The paranoid rancher who boxed in a sweet little neighborhood. Then maybe, I said, it's time I become exactly that. He looked at me sideways. What do you mean? I mean I give them a villain they'll never forget. The next morning, I held a press conference, right at the edge of the ranch line, right in front of Carl's fancy stone wall. Reporters showed up, hungry for the next big drama in the HOA war. I wore my Stetson, stood tall, and let the cameras roll. My name is Randy Walker. I'm a veteran, a landowner, and a peaceful man. I came home to live a quiet life, raise cattle, and protect what my family built over 5 generations. I never joined this HOA. I was never invited. And yet they decided to block my gate, sabotage my property, and now file federal complaints to stop me from using land I legally own. I paused, eyes sweeping the crowd. Let me be clear. I didn't start this, but I will finish it. Every action they've taken has been recorded, every lie documented, and when the court date comes, I'll see to it they're exposed for the corrupt, power-hungry cartel they are. If protecting my land makes me the villain, then fine. I'll wear the black hat. I walked away to the sound of clapping. Carl saw the whole thing, standing on the clubhouse steps with a red face and clenched jaw. Later that night, Megan texted me. That was legendary. More people are on your side now. Homeowners are organizing to vote Carl out. I replied, it's about time. But just as I started to feel momentum turning, another hammer fell. A sheriff cruiser pulled up to my cabin just after 9 p.m. Deputy Kelly stepped out looking tired. Randy, we got a new issue. What now? There's been a break-in. HOA clubhouse was vandalized. Spray paint, windows busted, even some computer damage. Carl says you're behind it. My stomach dropped. What? He says he saw your truck drive past the clubhouse minutes before it happened. I didn't go anywhere near it, I said. Check my security cam. I was home the whole time. She nodded. I figured. But we'll still need you to come in and make a formal statement. Just routine. Routine or not, I could see where this was going. They were trying to frame me, trying to make it look like I was escalating beyond paperwork, that I was dangerous. I rode with Kelly, gave my statement, and got back home after midnight. Ranger met me at the gate, wagging his tail, but something was off. His tail stopped wagging. He growled low, then barked toward the tree line. I turned fast and saw a flicker of light, then another, then pop, a loud crack like a firework. I ducked. Someone was on my land. This battle's going off the rails. Have you ever been wrongly accused by your HOA? Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. The pop echoed across the ranch like a warning shot in the dead of night. Ranger barked wildly, lunging toward the trees. I grabbed the flashlight mounted to the porch rail and clicked it on, sweeping the beam across the edge of the clearing. There. Movement. 2 figures in dark clothing sprinted through the brush. I shouted, "Hey!" and ran down the porch steps, Ranger charging ahead. My boots pounded the dirt as I crossed the clearing toward the tree line. The flashlight bounced with each step, barely catching glimpses of them weaving through the brush. Another pop, this time farther out. Firecrackers, meant to distract or cover something up. But I wasn't buying it. They'd trespassed, and they were trying to shake me. I stopped chasing. Instead, I crouched by the old fence post near the eastern trail and listened. Ranger growled softly beside me, ears perked. Then I saw it. A red glow flickering near my east hay shed. I ran. Smoke was rising again, faint, but real. This time they hadn't tried to torch a building. They had set a small fire just outside the shed, right by the backup generator cables, enough to start a panic, or worse, destroy my secondary power source. But they'd failed. The fire hadn't spread, thanks to last week's rainfall soaking the ground. I stomped it out with my boots, yanked the wires free, and checked the cameras mounted on the corner. Thank God. The footage was intact. Clear visuals of two individuals in black hoodies and gloves, faces covered. But one of them, tall, limping slightly, had a very specific silver watch glinting on his wrist, a watch I'd seen before, on Carl Hopkins. The next morning I sent the footage to Patrick. Within hours he had it submitted to the sheriff, the county, and the BLM agent who had temporarily frozen my land use. Suddenly the tables turned. Carl had gone from complaining to explaining. He was now the subject of a full criminal investigation for vandalism, arson, trespassing, and making false federal reports. But even while the sheriff's office looked into it, something else was brewing. Right inside the Twin Creeks HOA. An uprising. Jason and Megan called me with the update. "You flipped the whole neighborhood," Jason said. "There's a petition going around to dissolve the HOA board and replace them entirely." Megan added, "The dues tripling? The federal complaints? The public video of you at the press conference? It backfired on Carl. Bad." Then came the twist we didn't expect. Carl vanished. No meetings, no emails, no HOA presence. For 3 days straight, his house sat dark. Word around the neighborhood was he'd packed a few bags and left town. Patrick grinned when I told him. He knows he's cooked, probably hoping if he hides, the sheriff will back off. But I wasn't ready to let go. I sent a final letter to the HOA board, the remaining 2 members who hadn't quit. In it, I offered a deal. Dissolve the current HOA structure, remove all barriers, restore road access, and cancel all false filings. In exchange, I'll waive 6 months of new landscape dues and allow continued access to trails, parks, and view areas, but only under a formal usage license drafted by my legal team. They had 48 hours to decide. I didn't expect a reply, but I got one. The very next morning, a white envelope was left on my gate. Inside, a handwritten letter. "Mr. Walker, we, the remaining HOA board members, accept your terms. The community has voted. Effective immediately, Carl Hopkins has been removed as HOA president. We are dissolving the current HOA structure. We ask for a fresh start, one of cooperation, not conflict. Sincerely, Barbara Lane, Edward Marcus, Ranger," barked happily at my side as I read it. It was done. The war was finally over. That afternoon I met with Jason, Megan, Edgar, and a dozen other neighbors. We shook hands. They apologized for the silence, the fear, and for letting Carl get as far as he did. I told them, it's not about what's behind us now. It's about building something better, together. We started drafting a new community charter, one built on respect, mutual support, and voluntary cooperation. No power-hungry board, no illegal barricades, just neighbors helping neighbors. But of course, this story wouldn't be complete without one final twist. 3 weeks later, while clearing brush near the Ridge Trail, I found a black duffel bag tucked under an old oak stump. Inside, stacks of HOA documents, fake filings, bribery receipts, and a small burner phone, all tied to Carl Hopkins. We turned it over to the sheriff. An arrest warrant followed. Carl was picked up in a neighboring state trying to sell land rights he didn't even own. Fraud charges were added to the list. As for me, I now own the entire landscape surrounding Twin Creeks. The gate that was once blocked, now it's wide open, and every time I drive through it, I tip my hat to the land and smile, because when they tried to lock me out, I bought the ground beneath their feet and made them pay for the view. For the first time in months, peace settled over Rocking W Ranch like a quiet desert breeze. The trails were open again. My water lines flowed uninterrupted. Neighbors waved when I passed by. And the gate that had once been welded shut by the HOA, now it stood proud, reinforced, solar-powered, and adorned with a large metal sign that read, "Private Ranch, Community Welcome Respect is the only fee." But just as things seemed to find a new rhythm, life tossed me one last curveball. I received a formal letter from the county courthouse. A hearing had been scheduled, not about Carl's charges, but about property tax reassessments across the Twin Creeks district. Apparently, now that I owned the majority of the surrounding land, the county planned to reclassify the value of homes in the HOA, triggering a dramatic spike in property taxes for every single homeowner inside. Some increases would triple, others would quadruple. It wasn't my doing. It was a direct result of my land acquisitions, the rezoning shifts, and Carl's mess of fraudulent filings. But the effects? Real. I couldn't help but feel a wave of guilt. Many of these folks had nothing to do with Carl's schemes. They'd just been swept along, caught in the storm. So I met with Patrick and Tara, and we drafted a proposal. I called it the Neighbor Relief Pact. Under it, any homeowner from the former HOA who contributed volunteer hours toward ranch upkeep, trail maintenance, or educational programs at our new Ranch Learning Center would receive a land use rebate to offset the spike in their taxes. They didn't need to pay me. They just had to show up, lend a hand, build something better. Jason and Megan were the first to sign up. They brought 4 friends and planted a community garden near the old horse stables. Then came Barbara and her book club. They painted the learning center's exterior and brought sandwiches every weekend. Even Edward, the quiet ex-board member, built benches around the trail loop, dedicating each one to fallen veterans. The place was coming alive, and the ranch, it had never looked better. Meanwhile, Carl's legal fate unraveled quickly. With the duffel bag evidence, the drone footage, and sworn testimony from more than a dozen residents, the case against him was airtight. He faced charges for trespassing, property destruction, fraudulent filings, false reports to a federal agency, attempted arson. He took a plea deal in the end. 4 years probation, $120,000 in restitution, and a public ban from participating in any HOA board for life. He tried to sell his house in Twin Creeks, but no one would buy it. Not with his name tied to the scandal. Last I heard, he moved out of state. Good riddance. But the best part? The billboard. Remember the massive red billboard I put up near the Twin Creeks entrance? Well, I left it standing, but I changed the words. Now it reads, "Together we built something stronger. Rocking Ranch welcomes all who respect the land." And under that, a small plaque that reads, "In memory of HOA tyranny. May it never return." We held a gathering to unveil it. More than 60 people came. Families, ranchers, veterans, kids on bikes. There was food, music, and even a ribbon-cutting ceremony. I gave a speech, simple but from the heart. I didn't fight to be right. I fought because no one should feel powerless on their own land. This isn't just a ranch anymore. It's a reminder that with truth, grit, and community, you can take back your freedom. They clapped, some cried, and just as the sun dipped behind the hills, Ranger barked loud from the porch, tail wagging like crazy. A dusty red pickup rolled in slow. It was Edgar. He hadn't been seen in weeks. The old rancher stepped out, beard longer, eyes bright. He nodded once like a salute. "I heard you finished what we started," he said. I smiled. "We sure did." Then he handed me something. An old wooden sign, cracked but painted with care. "Ranch boundaries may be fenced, but respect should always be open." We mounted it next to the gate, right where the barricade once stood, right where this whole war began. But before the night ended, one last surprise landed in my hands. A new letter from the county. This one didn't bring trouble. It brought power. They'd officially approved our land coalition's petition to form a private ranch district, meaning all land I owned was now governed outside any HOA jurisdiction. Permanently. No more complaints. No more threats. No more HOAs. I was free. And so were the people around me. That night we lit a bonfire the size of a truck bed. We roasted corn, told stories, and when the flames got high enough, we burned an old clipboard, one that looked just like Carl's. Everyone cheered. Even Ranger barked like he knew we'd won. Because in the end, they blocked my gate. So I bought the landscape and tripled their dues. But more importantly, I gave the power back to the people who deserved it. And that was the sweetest victory of all. If you stuck with Randy through the whole ride, you're a real one. Tell us what you think of this epic showdown. Ever faced HOA drama this wild? Where are you watching from? Let's hear your stories.